Order the facilities meeting. Today's June 25th. It's approximately 9:54. We're 4 minutes late. Motion to approve of prior meetings. Ms. Frazier, second by Mr. Simpson. All approve?
Aye.
Against? Approved. Okay. Action agenda, new business. Now, we're going to go with the airport agenda first, and then we will go to the public works second, obviously. It's a full agenda today. I think we've got about an hour, so I'm going to turn it over right now to Don McGraw.
Good morning, everybody. We have 3 resolution requests for the airport. First one is authorizing the chairman to renew a no-cost 30-year land lease with the FAA for our ILS outer marker facility.
Motion by Mr. Strauss, second by Mr. Simpson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Yeah, like that's the next one. The next thing we have on the list on page 5 is a request to authorize the chairman to increase the fee for the 3-day VIP pass at the airport during Balloon Fest. Since we started with the VIP parking, we've stayed at basically $15 for a 3-day pass, so it's $5 a day. As we're trying to increase revenues at the airport, I'd like to increase it to $20 for the 3 days.
Motion moved by Mr. Sokol, seconded by Mr. McDevitt. Discussion? Yes, Ms.
Does
Bramer.
this include parking for people with handicap passes?
No,
Is that a
that
separate
one's
thing?
different, is it not?
Yeah, well, handicap, most people park free.
Correct.
Right, this
So
is just for the
this is
VIP.
This is just VIP in the VIP area. So they wouldn't, if they were handicapped and wanted to park in that area, well,
They would be charged.
they would be charged. But we put them closer though.
Okay.
Yeah.
The handicap area at the airport was always taxiway alpha, and we always, if people showed their handicap stickers in their window, we would pull them all the way up taxiway alpha, which brings them right next to the terminal building.
Basically.
Yep.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Yeah, the only thing is they have to wait in line. So this gets them in a
Right,
different
right.
angle.
Okay.
Supervisor Stroud?
Well, ever since Chairman Conover appointed me to the Balloon Festival Committee, one of the issues came up, and I'll mention it now because it seems to be an opportune time to do it, is the availability of the passes. I guess last year we didn't get them printed until pretty late. Is there any chance we can get them printed out a little earlier this year?
They were actually printed well ahead of time last year.
All right, well,
Yeah.
they had a problem accessing them so they could help distribute them right
Was that through?
It's all
Mark?
done, it's all done online.
Yeah.
Last
Right.
year, the year before, previous years, they went out to the different towns. So
Okay.
last year we changed that, so it's all online.
now. All right, well, I said I'd ask,
Yep.
so I'll report that back.
Yeah, so they might have saw that they didn't get them, but
Yeah.
it's because they didn't get disseminated at all because it's all online now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's vote on it. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Number 6.
The third resolution is to authorize the chairman to approve a 1-day public event sponsored by the EAA on September 17th. It's a B-17 bomber will be coming to the airport for 1 day on display and charging rides.
Motion moved by Mr. McDevitt, second by Mr. Simpson, I believe. I couldn't tell. Maybe.
Oh, Mr. Lowe.
It's Mr. Lowe. There's 2 hands.
I try to
Okay.
stay out of your sight.
Okay, well, a lot of people like to stay out of my sight. I don't know why.
They're twins, Dougie.
Twins. Okay. Okay, discussion. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, referral and pending items, there are none. Information for discussion review. Kevin Hajos, you're going to talk a little bit about the Adirondack Balloon Festival.
Yeah, the Balloon Festival is back for another year. I think this is the 46th year. Last year was 45. Maybe I'm a year off. And they'll be back September 20th through the 22nd.
Okay,
But that's not Thursday?
discussion, Ms. Bramer?
Will they still be doing their Thursday evening
Yeah,
thing on the
I think
19th?
I think I just put the dates on there for the airport.
For the airport.
Oh, for the airport,
Yeah.
gotcha, okay.
Any other discussion on that? Yes, Mr. Stroud?
Just to note that, having been part of the onset of the meetings, that the Bloom Festival Committee, and there was like 11 people, and they're all working, and they're all working very hard to make this happen, that sometimes we take it for granted. We see the Bloom Festival happen, we don't realize all the work that goes into it, not only by the committee, but our own Warren County DPW and everything else. There's a lot of work that goes into making this happen, so sometimes we take it for granted. I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Yes, I concur, and I'm sure everybody on this committee and the board does too. The hard work of not only the volunteers, but also the DPW staff. I mean, it just doesn't happen, right, John? So, it takes a lot of preparation, a lot of work. Thank you for pointing that out. Airport Marketing Grant Update, a presentation by McFarland Johnson. So this time we're going to give McFarland Johnson people a few minutes here to discuss the marketing plan for the airport. As we all know, it's imperative that we increase revenues out in the airport to decrease the losses out there. And we're going to go full bore on that this year. We're going to do everything we can to decrease the funding portion from the county and increase the revenue portion. And so this, I'm excited. The marketing plan here is from McFarland Johnson. So, sir,
I just want
would you like to introduce him?
I want to
Thank
touch
you.
on it real quick, and then I'll have Don introduce him. I brought this marketing grant last year. This marketing grant was for McFarland Johnson to basically come up with the tools for us to advertise our airport. They're not going out and soliciting customers for our airport. They're not. They've been reaching out with Ed Bartholomew. We've included Ed Bartholomew in the discussions. But what they're doing is just providing us a tool, whether it's a brochure or something, to actually go out to individuals and hopefully get them to the airport. So I just want to start off with that. So I'll turn it over.
Yeah, I'll turn right over and you can go.
Yeah, sir, if you want, you could use the microphone so we can all hear the podium, unless you need a different format.
No, this should work. Can everybody hear me?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Jeff Wood. I'm the Regional Director of Aviation for McFarland Johnson. With me today is Turner Bradford. Turner is in our Saratoga office, and he is our client manager for Warren County for issues pertaining to the airport. So we're talking about the... my game in order here.
You're going to turn it on?
Or turn it on the side. No, you just gotta turn it on.
He does.
There we go. How about that? All right. So, New York State DOT issued a grant in 2017 under what they call their SOARS program. It's 100% state funded, and the purpose is airport marketing, promotion. New York State DOT is very interested in helping airports increase their revenue and reduce costs. And the idea is just to make folks aware of the business opportunities at the airport, develop some very conceptual development plans, and prepare some graphics and promotional materials, and we'll show you a little bit about that. So our scope of work was to identify possible development sites at the airport, considering some of the constraints we know are there: environmental, airspace, zoning, utilities availability, accessibility, both from the ground and from the air. And we looked at aeronautical, non-aeronautical, solar, and ultimately identified 10 sites for development. We worked very closely with Don and with Ed to identify what things would be attractive to developers, the information that they want to have. They look at things a little bit differently than, well, they look at things consistent with their own needs, and they know what it takes to get a site developed. So we really tried to focus on information that would be helpful to a potential developer. The idea ultimately, I'm skipping to the end here, essentially is to put the information on the website. That's how people do their research. That's how they're going to find you. They're going to type in Floyd Bennett Memorial Airport, and they're going to want to know what's there. So on the upper left there, you'll see we're going to add a link to the bottom of the airport's website about development opportunities. We'll get some general information about the airport, where it's situated, and then the development sites. And I'll go into a little bit more detail. So the first thing they'll see is, where you are from a drive time perspective relative to Albany and Lake George. We thought those were two prominent features that people would be able to relate to, know that you're 60 miles drive from Albany, more or less. And you're roughly a 2-hour flight from 50% of the population of the country. So that will give somebody that doesn't know the county, doesn't know where Warren County is, an idea where you sit in the world and how accessible you are, especially in the northeastern U.S. The idea has been to get all of the information out there so there's no surprises. So we've got the zoning for both Warren County and Washington County for the airport property, so developers know what that is. And then we've got the airspace and wetland restrictions, so they can see that and kind of see what they have to work with as they look at developing one of the sites. Again, the idea is no surprises, here it all is, and help you make a decision. Utilities are very important. It's a huge cost when you're developing a site. So we'll have this utility map. It's got water, sewer, electric, broadband, and gas. One thing that is critical to developers, especially for solar, especially the things that are going to demand a lot of energy, is how far are they from a substation. So we've got that information on there. There is a substation about 1.5 miles south of the airport on Queensbury Ave. That can be a huge cost driver for potential developers, so we want that out there so they can see it. And then they'll get to this overall map. This is the airport property. We've identified the 10 sites. So you can see where they are relative to the airport and the runways. We identified about 200 acres of developable property through this process. The prospective developer will be able to click on those. We'll be able to click on the animations aren't working here, but they'll be able to click on the development sites. They'll see an aerial photograph. We've got some recent drone photos of each of the development sites taken within the last 2 weeks, so they can see what it looks like today. And we'll have some of the pertinent development characteristics. How far away is the water? How far away is power? What's the road access look like? What are some building height limitations? And a general description. So it gives them a good snapshot very quickly to see, am I interested in this site or am I not? So this site, for example, does not have great road access, so it's probably better for more passive development such as solar, for example. I won't go through all the sites, but just to give you an overview, this is Development Area 2 right on Hicks Road. This one does have good road access. It's also got good airfield access, and all that information will be there on the website. This is Development Area 9 on Queensbury Ave, more towards the south of the airport. Again, we've got the recent drone photos. We've got the information on all the utilities and where things are, the size, and we've got a little bit of information about what the approval process is going to be. I did forget to mention that. We will have information on the website. Being that it's an airport, there are a lot of constraints and approval processes that you have to go through just to get FAA approval to do something non-aeronautical. So we'll outline what that is, from the environmental, from the airspace, from the change of use, that developers will understand and know what they need to do. And this is Development Area 10. Again, I'm just giving you a cross-section. This is at the very south end of the airport. As we went through these development areas, Don gave us explicit directions to minimize the tree clearing required for any development areas, again, to minimize some of the environmental concerns. So we did that. That's why it looks a little funny. We've got the drone photos and, again, the same data. So very similar format for everything, and they can just click through on the website and see the different sites and see what they might want to do. We also came up with a couple of concepts. This is a maintenance, repair, and overhaul concept. Again, just a concept to help someone along with the process of imagining what happened at a site. This is at the north end of the airport along Hicks Road, and it could be a phased development that includes some hangars and some aprons and some vehicle parking. Again, it's just an idea just to give people some thoughts about what could happen here at the airport. We did configure it to minimize the wetland impact. We do obviously have the wetlands between the proposed development and the runway. And it's inside the fence existing, so it fits from an aviation perspective. The other one we looked at was solar. We came up with 4 different development areas that we think would work well for solar. For the most part, they're somewhat remote from either roads or the airfield, so they fit well for more of a passive use that doesn't require a lot of access or a lot of active use by the public or by the tenants. They were picked out to minimize airspace conflicts and be compatible to the extent they can with the environmental constraints that are out there. And it's a quiet sort of passive use that can generate revenue for the airport. So just one more note on schedule. We've got the materials developed. We'll have hard copies of everything. I brought hard copies of the presentation. If folks want to leave them, I'll leave them here with you. The last step really is to get this information out on the website. We're working through that with the county's IT department, and we hope to have that wrapped up by the end of July and have it live for your use.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Would you take a few questions?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Ms. Bramer and then Mr. Loeb.
Thanks. I think the idea of the solar passive power idea is great, and I'm wondering if you have recommendations or thoughts on the distance to the substation, because that seems kind of far. about a mile and a half.
That's something that the developer is going to have to consider when they come up with a proposal, if they come up with a proposal.
Did
So-
you, can I just follow?
Yes,
Did you-
follow up.
When you were doing this, did you provide any recommendations to the staff about things that we could do that would make the site more developer-friendly prior to developers looking at it? Like some of the things that you talked about, zoning changes, that could be a real turnoff for a developer.
We've talked at length about that with Ed and with Don, and the biggest hindrance we see at airports is just the length of time it takes to get through all of the FAA approvals. So, if it's a non-aeronautical use, you have to do a change of use. There's the environmental, both from a federal and seeker perspective. So anything you can do to get the sites as close to shovel-ready as possible ahead of time is going to help make that more attractive. A lot of developers, they hear, it's going to take 6 to 9 months to get through the FAA process. That scares them away. So if you can move the ball forward, get seeker done, for example, get permits in place, that's going to help. But that's also expensive, too.
Thank you. Mr. Loeb?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff, you mentioned at the very beginning about the website, people who go on the website, internet, to access Floyd Bennett Field.
Yep.
As you know, there's also Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn.
Yes.
When you're building the website access, does it also allow equal access to type in Glens Falls Airport, Warren County Airport, Adirondack Airport, Queensborough Airport? It's going to focus in on...
If they get to your airport website, then the information will be available. It'll be linked to the airport. So however they get to your website, they'll have access to the information.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, I'll entertain any questions from the audience. Mr. Whitehead.
Thank you. Hi, we had a presentation here from the DPW superintendent, Jefferson County, and he is managing every airport and is actually active.
Would you speak up, Mr. Whitehead? We can't hear you up here. Thank you.
I was talking about Genesee County Airport, one of the few that we know that is running in the black. And I just was going to ask him, one of the things that the superintendent indicated was that we had avionics company there that generated a good deal of revenue for them. And I'm just wondering about what the potential would be to get that kind of, it's very, very tough to find someone like that, or is that an expanding area or a contracting area? You have obviously more experience than we do.
I think we've all heard about the pilot shortage. Well, there's also a mechanic shortage, but there's also a market out there, and you've got sites that are suitable for that type of development, certainly within this plan. It's just a matter of going out and finding them.
How would we do that? Go out and find?
Mr. Bartholomew.
I think one of the issues that's coming into play is that while there is a great need for mechanics and so forth, it seems to be centralized in more metropolitan areas. As an example, Westchester County Airport, which has expanded, has intensified the number of mechanical repairs at that particular site, whereas in the past, some of the more rural areas, airports in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, we have business there, that they basically would send, if the plane is not operative, they would send a crew up to repair it at that particular location. Nonetheless, there still is an amount of business, and I think the way that you want to do that is to work with the fixed-base operator, Mr. Skimmerhorn, because he's the one that's making contacts and working through his pilots and associations in order for that to get done. And I think the opportunity there is greater if Mr. Skimmerhorn continues to expand these hangars. It allows us to have more jets up here, thereby causing, I think, an increase in business for normal repairs. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to work closer together. And I just have to remark that I've seen a marked difference in the degree of cooperation among the parties with Don here as the airport manager. And I'm confident that we'll continue to work cooperative issue going forward in some of these areas that just took a long period of time to be done.
Thank you, Mr. Bartholomew.
Can I
Mr.
answer that
Wood?
real quick? Yeah. One of the things, there's certainly a market downstate, but the costs are very high. So we do see people looking more upstate because costs are lower up here. And so that makes it attractive, and it's a short flight to New York if you're shuttling an aircraft, so.
Great point. Any other questions from either the audience or the committee? Mr. Wood, thank you very much for your presentation. We are all on the same page with this. We're all connected, and I like the synergy that you provide and that we're going forward. So we got a lot of past issues behind us, and it's all good things going forward. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. DeGraw, also. Okay, that will conclude the airport portion of the meeting. We'll now move over to the Public Works section, so if you can get your agendas out for that, I'd appreciate it. And as you're doing that, we're going to go right to action agenda and the new business. And number 2, request to amend the fleet policy. Mr. Hajos.
This is real quick. It actually came through Tammy DiLorenzo and actually the county administrator's office. The fleet policy, the receipt of, and I apologize, I thought I highlighted on everybody's sheet, but apparently it did not. Under the fleet policy, letter C, it says receipt of vehicles. DPW vehicles were always accepted at DPW, not through the fleet manager, so that's the only change in the policy. I don't think there's anything else with the rest.
No, just to clean up.
Yep.
Questions? Mr. Sokol?
No, do we need to
We do.
have a motion for that? Yes.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Sokol, second by Ms. Bramer. Discussion. Ms. Bramer?
Kevin, you're gonna kill me, I know, but
I'm going to point to Ryan afterwards, so go ahead.
I want to include something in here that says we will consider higher efficiency fuel vehicles and/or hybrid and/or electric in our purchase.
You want to include that in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do look at that, but I'd be happy to document it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put it into the policy that we will consider it. Given our cost considerations, I know that Frank has helped us do that cost-benefit analysis before, but if we're changing the policy, I've got to throw it out there and try to...
Well, I have no
advocate
problem with
that,
it
put
being in the policy either, Ms. Bramer. I mean, at the end of the day, we make prudent decisions representing the taxpayers' money. On the other hand, we also represent climate and doing what we can to, little pieces here and there to help affect it. So, putting it in the policy is fine with me, Mr. Moore?
Sure, there may be instances where it's more appropriate. We look at sometimes the health nurses that are driving up in the northern part of the county. We wouldn't want them to run out of power. It wouldn't work for the sheriffs, but there may be uses for vehicles that would work for, so we can consider it for sure.
Yeah, I know we as supervisors have driven to events and we've taken the hybrid and it's been fine.
Mhm. So
It's been great. It's
yeah,
been a great
it would be a consideration piece of the policy, and I'm more than fine with that. And I think Mr. Hajos seems to be fine with it. And is anybody against that on the committee? I don't think so. That's great. So yes, Mr. Loeb.
Not against, actually in support. You talk about driving a hybrid versus full electric. As Ryan says, full electric could be problematic, but driving a hybrid, just anecdotal evidence. When I was down in Miami for Hurricane Irma, I was driving a Prius, and the lines at the gas pumps were quite long. And whereas most people driving a gas vehicle, I had to stop 3 times over a week, I only had to stop once. So it was a real advantage having the Prius in that situation of an emergency.
Thank you. Any other discussion on that? Okay, we will amend the policy then to include your suggestion, Ms. Bramer and Mr. Sokol. So the question's been called. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay. Number 4, CB Geiga property lease. The committee authorized a resolution to approve a 6-month lease with D&G Recycling, including the use of 1 bay at a rate of $6,500 per month. Further information to be provided at the next meeting regarding cost, location for a pole barn, and so forth. That was tabled at the board meeting this past Wednesday, and so I will hand it over to Mr. Hajos, and we'll go forward at this point.
All right, I handed out to each one of you a packet that has 11 by 17 in it, so I guess I will call your attention first to the colored sheet that I provided, and I can kind of use that colored sheet and go through each one of the packets. What I had done is I looked through the county, with the help of Brian too, at sites that could basically house an OES facility, this pole barn or so let's say three-sided structure. So if you look at the colored spreadsheet, basically you'll see 10 different sites located on there. A couple here at the county center, a couple spots over on Gurney Lane, Queensberry Avenue at the Emergency Fire Training Center, the old shop in Warrensburg, new shop in Warrensburg, and then the South End shop. As you go down through, I gave a brief description of each one of the different sites, and then kind of a site advantage or disadvantage. Most of the site advantages were they were close to the campus, being on the county center, or very close to it. Some of them, you know, they needed minor fill or grading. Some had electrical services in place. As you'll see, the old shop, new shop in South End, they would be co-located with DPW. I know there's always been a security concern for Brian and his equipment, so the old shop and the South End shop are both fenced-in sections. Of course, Brian's, you know, if there was a shop ever built there for him, they'd have to have keys or access to get into. Disadvantages of most of the sites, again, not utilities. The one on Gurney Lane where we have our salt shed over here, there's a brick building that we have in there that we store some minor equipment in, but the building is in fairly poor shape. You could fit, you know, a building on that site as well, but it may need some minor fill material over there as well. On the last part of the top of this page, the last row going across, you'll see structure size. As you go through the packet, the other packet that I have, Brian had provided me with different size structures that could house his equipment. He had a couple different sizes on there, so I just chose those sizes to base my cost off of. The only one that I added on was a structure that would be 30 by 160. That's comparable to, you know, square footage wise is 65 by 75, but that would be single bays that he would pull each one of his piece of equipment in single bays. Possibly in some of them you'd have 2 trailers in those bays. So with that being said, I looked at that structure size and said, okay, which site of the sites that I listed, the 10, can fit those structures? So as you'll see, and the first one is example, county center, that structure sizes that could fit here at the county center would be a 65 by 75, a 76 by 82, an 80 by 90. The last structure size that I had, 30 by 160, would not fit on that site. If you go down to the bottom of the page, I have costs associated there with each one of the structures. Now when I say in the first 4 columns, 65 by 75 not complete, meaning it's just a 3-sided structure. There's no garage doors on it. It's just a structure, 3 walls, and open for him just to pull his equipment in, period. And you'll see the cost broken down for each one of those type structures. The next 4 columns after that list 65 by 75 complete. That means with doors, means with a concrete floor, footings, insulation around the footings, so on and so forth. And that's basically the bottom line cost on those. You'll see at the bottom of the page, it's a total cost. Those costs don't include, and it was hard for me to break this out, the electrical or if there was any site work or paving work to go along with this. Each one of the sites has like the county center, for example, over here behind the shop, number 1, it has a paved area over there. There wouldn't be a lot of concrete work except for the footings, but he has a paved area. He could use the pavement to pull his equipment in on. So that's an example there. The electrical over here behind this building, there is electrical there. On some of these sites, there is no electrical. The Gurney Lane site, that's where the old HSB building, there's no electrical up there anymore. We'd have to run all new electrical. So I couldn't include each one of those prices into the total cost. So the reason I did this is because it was a referral from the last committee meeting. You know, if I was to, and I was asked this question the other day, if I was to recommend a site, for me the sites that work well are the old shop in Warrensburg, the new shop, or the south end in Queensbury, where some of his equipment is close by right now. One, because they're secure sites, and two is, with some of those sites, there's electrical already associated, or it's a very short run of electrical. I think Brian, and I'm going to let him jump in on the buildings and any other recommendations he has for those. I think his concern is they're just not close to here, the county center, where he has, his offices. Again, doing this was because of what came out of last committee meeting, and then on top of it is because Brian said he still needed the D&G facility.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, can we call Brian over here?
Yeah, we're going to, he's here.
Yeah, he's here.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, we can,
I'm looking around, sorry.
okay.
Kevin, you were flashing.
So I would like Brian maybe to talk a little bit about the buildings and his needs. I was down to the Ciba-Geigy property yesterday. Of the two bays, Brian has, I think, just a light plant in one bay, and in the other bay he has some equipment, but there's room to put more equipment in there. Now I'll let Brian talk to his equipment. As I talked with the chairman this morning, it's tough for him to pull out his equipment in there because it's a single door, and he's got trailers side by side. So if he needs his ATV trailer, which is in the back, he has to pull out all these other trailers first to get that trailer out. Now that's why I like the 30 by 160 structure, because it's single bays that he can just pull in and pull structures out. But again, I will turn it over to Brian and let him go from there.
Okay, Brian?
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Kevin's put a lot of time into this, and I appreciate that. The first 11 by 17 page you have shows the existing building that we're at down at the Ciba-Geigy site. A number of the vehicles, 5 to be exact, are not down there right now. They're here because we're working on them. The diagram that you see is what I have when I have all my equipment down there. And even then, I still have a couple trailers that are not physically in the building. So to say that there is an extra bay, I have a little bit of a problem with that. And the other part of the problem I have is if we do that, now the security fence is no longer a security fence because we have the D&G folks in the same room as my equipment. So
Mr. Hajos would like to make a comment on that?
Just real quick on that, and I know that was a concern of Brian's for that security fence. I've already spoken to my buildings and ground staff. It's not a difficult move. If we were to give that bay to D&G, it would be a simple move for us to move that security fence over.
are you talking about the short bay?
Yes, the short bay. Yeah.
The only concern I have there is that could be done, certainly. When you look at this picture, these are scale drawings. Each of these blocks that you see are pieces. I can show you how I do it. It's very simple. I take a scale drawing and I take a scale picture of the vehicle itself. This is exactly the way they fit. Right now, it's very difficult to open the doors on some of these vehicles. If they're up against a security fence, the doors on all of these is on the right-hand side. The front is on the right. The front of the building is, or the front of our facility is on the right-hand side of your picture. So I would just want to be careful that, number one, where you're going to put the other stuff, and number two, it's cramped in there as it is. In some areas, you have to walk sideways to get between the buildings. It's not great. We can't open the doors. All the trailers have a ramp that comes down in the back. The trailers are close enough together. We can't open the ramps without moving things around. Again, I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm just telling you the way it is and the first year that we have spent there. So that's that part of it if you want to figure out what you're doing there.
Mr. Moore pointed out that maybe
Just a question on how we could configure it with the doors, if you could reorient it so that all the doors for all the vehicles open to the inside. And you can leave a wider
You're
aisle.
talking about in a new building?
Oh, no, just in this long bay.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
What if you were to reorient the vehicles so that all the doors open to the inside rather than to the wall or to the fence?
Well, when you do that, then you can't hook onto them with a truck. Now you're talking about the tongue of the trailer is in the back of the building.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you, Ms. Bramer. I think Ms. Bramer has a question. Brian, sorry.
I think we need to talk about this current configuration, but I'd like to know what your opinion is on the building structures that Mr. Hajos put together.
Certainly.
Because I think that will help us understand our long-term plan and what we're going to do with the Steve Bagagi site.
Okay, stick with the one that we were just on for just a second. You'll look at the two vehicles marked hazmat, that's a trailer, and hazmat tow vehicle. And then below that is MCI 1 and MCI 2. Those are our mass casualty incident vehicles. Those are connected together. They are left connected together because they need to get out quickly. That's why they're in the front. That's why they're where they are. I understand Mr. Hajos' plan, but 30 feet deep will not take two vehicles end to end. So, and I understand what you were trying to accomplish, and I think that's great, and I'm sure there's a way around it. But the goal, with at least with those two sets of vehicles, is that the operator can go down there by himself or with two people and get that vehicle out without having to screw around hooking it up. Hooking these vehicles up is a real pain, to be very honest with you. Usually it's a lot easier with two people. We don't always have two people, so that's one concern I have about the 30 by 160. I appreciate the individual bays. I think that's great, but maybe we could have just one section of the building that was deeper. I don't know. You also can't fit the communications vehicle in if you only go 30 feet deep. That vehicle's 45 feet long. So,
Is the communications vehicle in here now?
yes.
Which one is that labeled?
That's the big one that says MCU 1.
Okay, and it's 56 feet. Is that what you just said?
About 45 feet.
45. My brain is not working. 45 feet.
And it's 9 feet wide. So, Mr. Dickinson has a question.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you. I know I'm late to the dance here, but I think we're looking at the wrong end of the dog here. I think we should take the present tenant we have, that's a tendency to be a nuisance, throw them out, and make the whole building EMS building.
Well, there's something.
We have nothing but trouble with them. There's trash blowing around all the time. You can't keep control of it. And we own the building. It wouldn't take that much to renovate it. We can get all those vehicles in there and give them some office space and get them in one location. Easy access, on a main road, multi-lane road. Got plenty of space outside to park vehicles or do whatever they need to do. Don't name it after me.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Strauss?
Well, I'm not so sure if you did a opportunity cost analysis of, what would be the financial benefit to the county in the long run if that scenario would be the healthiest. But again, where we have Brian down there, we're talking, from what I can see here, is almost 7,000 square feet. And is that ample for the storage of your vehicles and equipment?
It's close. Like I say, there's one or two trailers that are not in there right now, but they necessarily, we can jockey some things around. Ultimately, I'd like one of the vehicles to be at the Glens Falls Firehouse because they're the ones that operate it, but there's no room there either. That's all part of the scenario. Some of it can be shuffled around. The end-to-end piece, I'll be honest with you, when I pulled the trailers out of there this spring that we needed to bring up here to work on, the first two that are connected to the trucks, yeah, you can pull them out. The rest of them, you're backing into a cave. You cannot see from the driver's seat, you cannot see where you're going. And once you do that, it took three of us almost 3 hours to get those four vehicles out of there. and to back the other ones back in. And that's 3 people that know how to do it. I don't, at that point, I don't consider them response vehicles. I would consider them just vehicles. So, again, I'm not trying to be difficult, I'm just trying to be, I'm being practical. Fire departments for many years have had to deal with, they don't have enough room, they park fire trucks end to end in the station, it doesn't work, because you always got the wrong one. So, that's an opinion, I'm not here to decide one or the other, or to say you can't do it. I'm just giving you my opinion.
Okay, first a follow-up by Mr. Stroud, then Mr. Wild, then Mr. Loeb, then Ms. Bramer.
All right, so I'm just trying to establish how many square feet is ample, and then we can take a look at the design of, if we go to a new building, the design of a new building that would better service your access and exiting of your vehicles and equipment. So what I'm hearing though is something around 7,000 square feet might do it, although it's still a little shy of what's needed.
And I brought this up when, back when Mr. Gerard and Mr. Tennyson brought up the idea of putting us down there. You can't just go by square feet, because you could have one bay that's 7,000 square feet, but your vehicles are 6 deep. You also have to look at access and all that. If you were to go to the second page, which is a 75 by 80 building, that's where you can do your calculation, John, to get your square footage. That was version 1.
That's only 6,000 square feet.
So that wouldn't be sufficient.
Well, gee, this is Brian's drawing, this is your drawing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is 7,000 square feet, and that's not ample. Well, something's not working out here.
Okay, Mr. Wild?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For one, I was just going to comment on the last statement about the 80 by 90 building. That's the most expensive building to build because of the span. But Brian, I wanted to go back to the Civic ID building. You say it's difficult to get equipment hooked up. You know, I've got a vehicle with a backup camera, and it's quite easy to see. Can we retrofit our tow vehicles with a backup camera and make this work and save ourselves a lot of money?
2 of my vehicles have backup cameras now.
You guys can't figure out how to use them to hook it up? I do it all the time, and I don't hit the back of my bumper anymore. I know right where I am.
No, I appreciate, your thought on that. I can only tell you, when you're backing into a cave, the camera doesn't show anything. Okay? I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to argue whether or not the people I have are capable of operating the vehicles. I'm not getting into that. It's up to this group to decide. You want to use that building, you want to build a new building. I have been trying to make this work for 5 years. I have spent county money on engineers twice. I have quotes on these buildings. I know exactly how much it will cost for the building. Everybody says they know well span, this, that. I have actual quotes with stamped drawings from with New York State engineer stamped drawings. If we could just use that information rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm willing to do whatever you want, and I'll make this statement just once. I won't be here. This is not on my watch. So whatever you do, you're going to have to deal with the new fire coordinator and the new director of emergency services. So I will do everything I can in my power to help. I have worked very hard on this. Whatever you guys come up with, Kevin has some good ideas. The bottom line is, if the county is not willing to spend the money to protect and give the emergency services a place to have their equipment so they can work on it outside when they're not outside, that's the bottom line here. You can jam it into whatever building you want. You can put 1 trailer in Warrensburg and 2 trailers in Chestertown, and you don't understand. My people have to go and get those vehicles when they need them. Putting the vehicle at the farthest, I can hit a tennis ball from the South Shop into Washington County. To put to have our equipment the very farthest end of the county in a response mode makes no sense at all. It takes 20 minutes to drive down and get it. You take another half hour to get it out. How can you say that you're responding? So, again, I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to fight. It's up to you guys, whatever you want to do. The first decision that has to be made, are we going to use the MRF building, or are we going to build something? That's the bottom line.
Thank you, Brian. Mr. Loeb?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Several things. I'll first start reminding everybody what Supervisor Leggett pointed out last month or the month before, that we have a history of treating our emergency services as a stepchild. We don't have the emergencies that they have in other parts of the country, so maybe we think they're really not valuable. But when an emergency happens, you don't plan on it, and you want to be able to respond appropriately. I've said on record that we're not real estate agents, I would like to get rid of that property down on River Street. I'm of the philosophy of consolidating our services. We've heard Brian mention several times in this discussion that he's had to bring vehicles up here to work on. If they were consolidated into this area, that you wouldn't have to do it because they would already be here. I'm looking at this chart that Kevin put together. The two areas that look best to me are right in this area, number 2 and number 4. They would give Brian the size and the proximity to be most advantageous to him, if that's Brian's opinion. I'll also make a comment about money. We as politicians, in our nature, are looking, or maybe it's not maybe it's just tradition, that we always look at the money and we always look at, well, this is going to have a tax impact. And everyone's here saying, well, of course. But really, that's not our job. Our job is to provide the service and then figure out how we're going to pay for it. If we want to save money, we can provide no services, and that'll save a lot of money. Our job is to provide service, so we have to find out what's the best way to service the people of this county with our emergency services department. And then we'll figure out how to pay for it. We have plenty of money. We can't give away the amount of money we have in our, and don't, people say, well, 10 years down the road, we may run out of money. That may be. Right now, we have plenty of money in our fund balance. We wanted to address something like this. So we have to talk about what level of service we want to provide to our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Loeb. Ms. Bramer, did you have a comment?
Is it my turn again?
It's your turn now. Yes, it is.
Okay. I would like to see us go forward with that resolution that we tabled at the board meeting, which was to lease the one bay. I understand there's some things in there, but it sounds to me like long-term we want to get OES out of there. So let's go forward with that leasing of the one bay for the additional dollars and start working on a real plan to build a new structure on sites 2 or 4. I think 1 would be good, but 2 or 4 seems like they have the least negatives going on, and my preference would be this 65 by 75 with no sides.
So you're making a motion to re-entertain leasing out one bay for $6,500 a month to D&G Recycling for 6 months. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second? There's a second there by Mr. Garrity. Okay, discussion. Mr. Sokol.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just I brought this up a while ago when we were talking about bringing the electric cars. What are we doing with the properties across the street? Have we ever looked into just grazing some of those trees and then putting a structure over there? Wouldn't that be easier?
Can be.
Mr. Sokol, I think you'll look at probably Mr. Hajos.
I was looking at Brian, but
Okay.
I mean, he's been doing things for 5 years. I don't have a great memory, so I don't know if that was ever brought up, but...
Well, I do have thoughts on that matter, but
Well, I guess if you're asking Mr. Brian LaFleur the question, Brian, I'm not quite sure who you're
I'm
addressing.
willing to look at any property you would like to. That,
Okay.
I don't have a problem with that. Kevin and I discussed that, and he spent a lot of time looking at all these sites.
been trying to
There's
sell that
sites out
property,
there. I thought it would be nice to put it where the old Human Services building was, up on the hill. No, that's going to be used for something else.
No,
I
that's
don't-
number 4.
I don't know what that is. I don't know what that site is. I do know that when you're discussing utilities, yes, there would need to be electricity there. It would not be a lot of electricity, actually be a very small amount. But yes, would you have to bring a service in or run a wire from this building or however you're going to do it? Yeah, that's part of what you have to do.
Okay. All right, Mr. Stroud?
Well, there's basically two properties. You have the one that is across on the west side of the Northway, but the lot number is the same as the parcel that's on the east side of the Northway. In any event, let's talk about the parcel that used to be the Westmont facility. I've mentioned it before. The town would be willing to work with the county to come up with a zoning that would be appropriate for that. I would suggest professional office. That property, according to more than one realtor, will have an estimated value that could be up to $2 million. So when you're looking at opportunity cost, take a look at the potential value of the property that you might be giving up. Okay, now the other properties that are opposite us on Route 9, one of which is tied numerically to the other side, but we've had very difficult time marketing those because of limited access to Route 9 and so forth, that anything that was to be a high generation of vehicles would not likely be suitable there. And the state, I think, would have issues with a location of a high generation enterprise there. Those properties were maybe the property across the street where you could have access to the Great Escapes Drive and a signalized intersection or something like that might be worth looking into. Because when you talk about opportunity cost, there hasn't been any or minimal cost to the county for one of those. So if we were to locate a county building there, your loss in terms of potential sale would be minimal. Whereas if you take the site of the Westmont facility, your opportunity cost, you're losing maybe a potential $2 million.
Thank you, Mr. Stroud. Mr. Dickinson?
I have 2 points to make, if I could, please.
Sure.
You're talking about leasing this out now, you're going to take several of these vehicles out and put them out in the wild again. And you're not going to put this new building up. It's going to be 2 or 3 years before you get that plan put together and erected. They're going to be out there that whole time. That's the reason they're down there. We don't have any place for them. So I think that's a really poor idea. Secondly, Mr. Lowe was speaking entirely for himself. I have spent a lot of my time and effort dealing with emergency, the fire department and the EMS, both in the town of Lake George and here at Warren County. We have a meeting this afternoon. We are super concerned about our services for our public, and have been for quite some time. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion before we vote on this resolution that's on the floor, a motion that's on the floor? Excuse me, Mr. Wild.
You know, there's something I think that we're forgetting to understand, is that this equipment is in a environment that has been considered hazardous, potentially hazardous, because of the dust. And if I'm not mistaken, there was some comments that were made not too long ago that our insurance company has recommended that they be, I'm not sure, maybe removed because of that dust. So we have a situation where we have a building that is available for us to house. We can't realistically use it because of the dust for the tenant that's in there. So what are we going to do? We're going to move these things outside for, as to Super Dickinson's point, that's a good point, right? We're going to leave things outside for a couple of years? I think that's also against the terms of the grant that we had. So in my mind, the only solution we have is to take advantage of the one building that we do have, and that's the one in the Ciba-Geiger property.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Bramer?
I mean, my thought process is we should get them out of there. We should not be using that building. It's made for something else. It's made for recycling. We should be building something that will house our equipment to have them be protected and near the county center.
Thank you.
That would be to see us transition away from that building and maybe sell it down the line.
Mr. Hajos?
Just a couple of quick things. The question came up of how long it would take to build a facility like this. When I did these cost analysis, I did this based on using our staff. The only outside staff that we were ever going to use was going to be the crane service to basically put this building, or put the frame of the building in place. The rest of it would be done in-house. I can probably double all these costs, and you can have a contractor come in and do it if that's the route you want to take within 6 months. But again, you're going to double all the costs that are on this sheet.
So you're telling me that we can do it in-house, at the cost currently on the sheets, depending on what option we choose, 6 months?
No, I'm not. I'm telling you that the cost that's on this sheet right now is in-house staff to do
Right.
it, and it would take probably a year. I mean, I don't have staff dedicated to build these facilities. I have staff to do maintenance on buildings and roads. I don't have a dedicated staff to be able to put these buildings up and concentrate all their effort on that. Then everything else goes by the wayside within the county. So it would take my guys a year, year and a half, possibly up to 2 years to get a facility like this complete, because I just can't put all my guys into doing this. A contractor will do this in 6 months' time, but you'll, at a minimum, double all the prices that are on this spreadsheet.
Are there any state grants available to assist us in the construction of one of these buildings?
I'll let Brian talk to any emergency services type grants. I know under the CFA or DOS there could be. I mean, we actually, Don was going to make the award earlier, or make the announcement earlier. We just got busy doing other things. The fire facility that we had put in a grant for to house our fire equipment at the, I'm sorry, not the fire equipment, the snowplow removal equipment at the airport. We just got word yesterday that we were awarded the grant for design. So there are grants out there. That was an FAA one, but I think there's grants out there, at least, I would have to assume, to build a facility to house OES.
Brian, would you, first of all, you can't before, but second of all, would you know of any grants?
The only grant that our agency gets each year is a Homeland Security grant, and it is very specific that you can use it to purchase equipment, and you have to make sure it matches what they want you to buy for at that particular time, generally hazmat and Homeland Security. That's the only money that I get. It very distinctly puts in there that you cannot buy physical facilities. I could lease a facility with that money, and then I wouldn't have any money to do buy any equipment, but you can use that money as a lease, but you cannot build a permanent structure with those dollars.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, then Mr. Loeb.
Just the last thing I wanted to add on is I had chosen the 3 facilities, 7, 8, and 9, or 8, 9, 10, as being my recommendation for a site, simply for the fact that there was room to build those 30 by 160 structures, and that they would be single bays. As Brian said earlier, a couple of his pieces of equipment a little bit bigger, you could add on to each one of those bays a little bit more. I mean, if it was my recommendation, and Brian, I know you said you were in the south end of the county where you are now, my recommendation is the 2 in Warrensburg, because that's a great location for DPW, because we are centrally located in the county to get to Hague and Horicon, or to get down here to Queensbury. So that was my recommendation, to go forward with a site of those 2.
Thank you. Mr. Loeb?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, picking up on what Kevin just said, if we were going to do it located around this campus. I like what Supervisor Strauss suggested. That doesn't seem to be on this list. This land is, I remember we were trying to sell that 5 years ago. So I like that. And I agree with Supervisor Dickinson and Supervisor Wild in that Brian has said he needs those bays right now. So let's take care of what Brian needs, and at the same, not worry about, oh, we can get an extra $5,000 a month. Let's take care of what Brian needs now by letting him use the facilities that we currently have. And at the same time, let's start building a building for him. And then continue on with our current month-to-month or however it is, but not give up the facilities that Brian needs.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is, do we approve or not approve of a 6-month lease to D&G for $6,500 using 1 day? So now at this point, I'm going to call the question. All in favor of approving a 6-month lease with D&G Recycling using 1 bay, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
All right, show of hands, please. We have Mr. Loeb opposed,
Vote.
Mr. Wild opposed, Ms. Frazier opposed,
For clarification.
and Mr. Diamond opposed.
This is to approve?
This
the
is
motion?
to approve the motion,
So giving them an additional bay?
giving them 1 bay
That's
for
right.
6 months.
Mine is a no vote.
For
There is
$500
no
a
vote.
month.
The ayes, I believe, have it. The ayes have it, the motion is approved. Okay. Ms. Claudia, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I would like to make a motion that we proceed with building a building, this 65 by 75 or whatever he needs, up at the Warrensburg site. Either the old shop or the new shop.
So you're asking for a motion
Yeah.
to build a 60 by 75 building up at the Warrensburg, what
I'm not sure it needs to be that specific, because I was not thinking the Warrensburg would work, since Kevin only had 30 by 160, and Brian was saying that wouldn't work, but if Kevin thinks the 30 by 160 could be slightly modified and still fit on that site, then I think that's a good site. I will not support building a site like this on completely undisturbed land that we have over here. We have land that's already has our DPW
Are you making that a
site.
motion?
There's pavement in place.
Are you-
Yeah, I'm
are
making
you-
the
are you-
motion to
I'll
build a
second
building.
Okay, so let me, so this is the motion, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Bramer, that your motion is, you're proposing that we authorize to, the county to build a building up at site, and show me on the map
8
here.
or 9.
8 or 9, not being specific, okay, 8 or 9. And what size building, Ms. Bramer?
Between 50 and 160.
Well, I think, do we need more?
No,
We'll do that.
we'll work it out.
Okay, all
wouldn't-
right.
Thank you.
So, is there a second for that motion?
I made it.
There's a second by Mr. Garrity, the supervisor from the great town of Warrensburg.
Okay, we'll put
Uh,
breadcrumbs out.
Now we'll have discussion. Mr. Simpson?
Okay, so if we move it up there, maybe I missed something, but where would your option be? Still here? So in
That's up to you guys.
emergency, you would have to,
At one point, we had discussed amongst ourselves, if you were still lacking space in this building, i.e. for public defender and those folks down there that are hiring people every day, if you want to add a piece onto this building and make that our offices, that's up to you guys. I don't care. My only question, well, let me say one more thing if I can, please. I was advised, and Mr. Wild alluded to it, that when NYMER, our insurance agency, went down to that facility and they took subject matter experts with them, and they did a survey, and they produced a report that says that the building is hazardous, we should not be down there. Okay, I understand that. That's from the insurance company. As a department head, and for myself, who has already had stage 4 cancer, should I be putting my people at risk in a facility that has already been determined to be unsafe? That's something I deal with I take very seriously. I don't put my people at risk with anything. I give them the tools that they need to do the job and that. But I understand. Okay, we're going to ignore that. Okay. Several weeks ago, there was another survey done down there by a different insurance company that is looking to bid on the county's insurance against NYMER. They wouldn't go in the building. They physically would not open the door. So, is that an exaggeration? I don't know. I'm not an environmental engineer. All I know is I've been a fireman for 46 years, and I know what's good and I know what isn't good. So, that being said, I will do whatever you people ask me to do. I appreciate the fact that you are looking to actually do something down the road to actually make this right. I am concerned about the numbers that get thrown around, and I understand Kevin's numbers. He did a very good job. You can buy this building, version 2, which is the biggest one with room for buildings and grounds, that will be delivered on site with overhead doors insulated for $90,000. The cost of erection, okay, so we double that. So you're dealing with $160,000, $170,000. I think that you need to think about that, and what are we going to do? How are we going to build it? Again, I won't be here, but I appreciate Ms. Bremer's motion, and I think that that's good, and I will stay wherever you tell me to stay, and you guys decide.
Thank you, Mr. LaFleur. Now, we're running 17 minutes late, so I will entertain just a couple more comments, and then I will call the vote. First, Mr. Loeb, then Mr. McDevitt, and then Mr. Wild. Those are the last three comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, this won't take longer. We have these options, and I appreciate what Supervisor Bramer said about the virgin land, and that's fine. But I'm disturbed at what Brian says, that he'll do whatever we want to do. Yes, we have to make the decision, but we have to make a decision based on his advice. What does he think is going to be best as far as providing emergency services? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McDevitt and Mr. Wow.
I had my hand up earlier too, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I didn't see it. Okay, Mr. Diamond, you haven't spoken yet, so you will get the last one.
Thank you.
No, I think the issues raised by Brian from a health perspective, I don't know if that's valid or not valid. The comments relative to an insurance company not wanting to go in the building, I don't know if that's true or not true, but it would seem to, what's the story on that?
I haven't heard that, but I have a note to ask Amy Clute about it.
If we could somehow come to the conclusion, because that's pretty serious stuff,
Yeah.
if indeed it's accurate.
No, I can tell you last year that, in terms of the dust, the insurance, our insurance broker, I believe, told us that there was a potential combustion issue. So if we were going to stay in this building, we would have to put up a curtain wall probably, or at least keep that option open if the vacuum machines weren't functioning properly, as well as replace the roof and whatever else that building may need.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Wild and Mr. Diamond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two comments, and there's questions associated with it. The first one is, how are we going to pay for this?
And I was going to ask Mr. Thomas that.
So I'd like to know how we're going to pay for this, whether there's any grants or something like that, because that'll make a difference in terms of how I think a number of us might vote going forward. But the second is related to the comment that I made about the dust and what Brian has just recently made. And the statement is, what the heck are we doing allowing a tenant in our building having an environment that could basically destroy our building? I have a hard time with this. This is, now we have two insurance companies saying that it's a hazardous place. The only reason it's hazardous is because of the tenant that we have in there. So as we go forward, I'd like to consider that, right? There's a way to evacuate that. You'd have to put a dust collection outside of the building. He hasn't done any of that, but we need to think of, I think it would be prudent for us not to move forward with any kind of decision about this property until we addressed whether or not that's a true safety issue, and what are we going to do about protecting our constituents' assets, not our assets, our constituents. That's county property.
Thank you. Mr. Diamond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to see a copy of those insurance reports that Brian has spoke about today, and in light of the fact that he brought up after this board voted on leasing an additional bay, he brought up the fact that this is a public hazard and that he doesn't feel that the building is adequate enough for his employees. So my point would be is, as Mr. Wild raised, we have an obligation to ensure that that building has that provides quality assurances to our tenant. And if it's not good enough for our employees, then how can we, in good faith, lease this building out to somebody to at substandards compared to our own standards? If we're not willing to put our people in the building because we have an insurance report saying there could be cause for issues, physical issues going down the road, how can we, in good faith, say, okay, it's not good enough for us, but we can lease it out to D&G? So I have to question the fact that even considering leasing it at this point, and maybe the option is to, because we're looking at a 6-month lease, maybe the option is to eventually use the building as the emergency medical building that was suggested by Mr. Dickinson, because if they're saying there's a liability having our people in there, what's the liability if we're leasing it out to a tenant?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Diamond. Very good points. Mr. Moore?
So the only issue, I'm not aware of any health issues, first of all. I'm aware of a combustion issue, and I will get that report out to this committee, and I will find out what any additional issues might be. This incident of a new adjuster not wanting to enter, that's new to me. That hasn't been reported up to me. I think that I'm pleased with where this committee discussion has gone, because what we need is a long-term decision. If we're going to keep EMS equipment there, we need to invest in this building. It's going to cost money in order to, make it safe for that equipment to be there. If we're going to move it out, we need to invest in a new building. In terms of liability for our liability to the lessor, the dust issue is an issue that's been caused by that operation. This is a building that was built for a recycling operation. There's inherently going to be dust issues there. We will do all we can to enforce the lease and cut down on that, but this is an issue that's caused by the operation that the lessor is running.
Thank you. I'll entertain 2 more comments from the floor now, because they've been having their hands up for a long time. First, Mr. Leggett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's 4 points I'd like to make. 5. I'll throw in here. Emergency services are a critical service that the county provides. We should take this seriously. We should give it consideration that's due to it, and put the money to it that it does need. As was mentioned previously by Supervisor Lowe, may I paraphrase, when you need it back. First of the other comments, the size. The form follows function. So to function with the vehicles that we have, the size and the shape of that building should determine the size and the shape of that building. Second, the cost of stamped plans. If Director LaFleur has plans already made up that are all set to go, there is a cost to that. Any of us supervisors that have had our public works projects know that engineering costs add up. And if this has already been covered, we're a step ahead. Third, the location, to be able to think of the critical areas that need to be serviced when an emergency happens. Where is that, and what is the response time to that? From exit 24 to this exit here is 10 minutes. So when I
go by Supervisor Garrity's town hall, I know I'm about 10 minutes from this meeting, so just to be able to put things in perspective. The drivers for these vehicles, where are they coming from? What 10 minutes do they need to cover? And then also on assessing the sites, Kevin did an excellent job on laying this out, and I think this really helps us as supervisors to make an informed decision about things. And when you look at site disadvantages, you know, it seems to me that number one, the only disadvantage is that there's a loss of parking. Perhaps that parking can be put somewhere else on this. We're already on the campus here, it's a disturbed site. So all of those ought to be considerations for the community.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas and Mr. Whitehead, and I'm going to close the discussions because we're 25 minutes behind. Mr. Thomas?
Thank you. I guess I'll compliment Mr. Hagels on this spreadsheet here. This is excellent. But my choice would be number 2. And as far as the size of the building, whatever size, necessary, it doesn't need to be huge. I think this campus right here is the place for this, because it's right next to the Northway. Most of the incidents that will take place will be in Queensbury or Glens Falls for the most part, and otherwise you can jump on the Northway and be anywhere in the county. As far as paying for it, I think we should pay cash, and I think we should get it done before winter. We've screwed around with Mr. LaFleur here for 5 or 6 years now, and it's time that we either put up or shut up.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Finally, Mr. Whitehead?
Thank you. I just wanted to mention there was a contentious solution you mentioned earlier, which wasn't followed up on, and that is that Homeland Security was paid for a lease of that property. Now, you can determine where it is, how big it is, whatever, but if you were to get someone like Mr. Skimmerhorn, who has offered to do this in the past, the DFS building is one example, he has come up and said, I will build this thing for you, I will lease it to you for 20 years, and I will sell it to you for $1 at the end of it. And, that is something that you could look at getting grant funded for, and you wouldn't have to pay cash for this problem.
Okay, I'm going to close the discussion.
One quick thing.
I don't have a comment.
Very quick.
Okay, Ms. Bramer, then Mr. Moore, and then we're done.
Okay, I don't have a
For
comment. I
today.
just would like to amend my motion to make it site number 2.
You'd like to amend your motion, which was,
To mention-
your original motion was, it would be site number 8 or 9. You're now amending your motion to go forward with the construction of a building on site number 2. Is that correct, Ms. Bramer?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Moore?
Just very quickly, every time I said lessor, I meant lessee. Sorry.
I knew what you meant.
I'll second her motion.
And the second to that amended motion,
I'll amend the amended motion.
the second to the amended motion is Mr. Garrity. One final comment, Mr. Hagels?
Just to let you all know where this is, and you can all stand up and look right now. That grass area that's right out here is where that building would be.
We need to include that in the by cash.
And what do you think of that site?
That's what I wanted.
The issues on that site is I know that there's utilities. The geothermal field that we have is in that further grass area on the opposite side of the ring road, so all that utilities come this way through that site. So we would have to determine where all those utilities are. That's the biggest disadvantage to that site, and it will need some fill in that area.
Okay, so I'm going to call the question now with the motion on the, amended motion on the table, which is that we go forward with building a building on number 2, which is the county center site. We haven't determined the size of the building yet, but just going forward with building a building on the county site, that's the motion on the table. So, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? One opposed, two...
I have to say opposed because I have no idea what we just signed up for. There's no costs. Is it a Taj Mahal? Are there going to be more discussions going forward, or are we just saying build it? Is that what we're saying?
No, we didn't say just build it. I believe we said, we haven't determined yet the size. And that will be determined at probably the next meeting after Mr. Hajos gives us even more input. So all we did was pass a motion asking that we go forward with building a building for the emergency vehicles on the county site.
How can we pass a resolution approving that with not knowing what it's going to cost us? To Mr. Wild's point, we're saying, go ahead, build the building. We don't know what it's going to cost us, but build it. And then at the end of the day, we'll figure out how much it's going to cost us, and hopefully we'll do it within some sort of number that
Not to exceed
we've
$2
approved,
million.
not to exceed $2 million. We're going to
No, no.
go ahead, build the building, but we don't know what it's going to cost us. It makes absolutely no sense.
So to clarify, this would be a referral back to Mr. Hajos for more specifics. But all we did today was basically go step one.
We found a location.
To find a location.
Got the location, here.
The location would be here. That's all we've done.
Cyber code.
It hasn't been approved, we
Search
haven't
for a lot.
approved the size, the cost, or anything else. We just said the location will be here at the county center.
And that we're going to move ahead with...
We're going to move ahead with, correct. Okay,
You're going to
motion
still
to,
move ahead, but you don't know what it's going to cost you.
we don't move ahead because we haven't approved even the
But he
final
just
building.
said that was
We
your
found the
answer
location.
to his question.
Moving ahead means getting the answers to your question. All right, let's...
There you go. Okay, boys,
The question
I'm
is
down.
now.
Now, motion to adjourn.
I move it.
Motion by Mr. Garrity, second by Mr. McDevitt. Meeting adjourned.
The airport
Very
plans
good.
are here on the table, anybody wants them?